into February now, and February and a bit of March are what we would call the most busy time of the year on our nursery. And it's busy because it's the repotting season. Many of you who are fairly new to bonsai, or those who do not know much about bonsai at all, may have heard that bonsai is all about cutting the roots. Ever since I started doing bonsai back in the 60s and 70s, whenever you attend flower shows, the public come up to you and say, oh yes, I know all about bonsai. Bonsai is all about cutting the roots, and that's what keeps the tree small. It is true to a certain extent. Just to recap, the reason why bonsai stay small is for two reasons. They are constantly pruned to keep them to the size you want, and we keep repotting them so that they do not get pot bound, and because they grow in a pot, the root restriction keeps the tree small. So those are the two reasons why a tree remains small. It's the pruning and growing it in a pot. Now if you keep growing the tree in a pot indefinitely, the tree gets pot bound, and that is when the tree needs to be repotted. Many people, when they buy a bonsai, the first thing they want to do is, oh, I must repot the tree, I must cut the roots. But don't do that. A tree needs repotting only when it needs it. Now, how do we know it needs it? Usually, if you're experienced enough, you can see the soil, it doesn't look pot bound, so you probably know by instinct that it doesn't need repotting. Now let me take you into our back greenhouse, because some of those indoor trees are not tied in. Most of our outdoor trees are tied in, so it's not that easy to get it out of the pot. But we will show you with the other ones. Maybe I can show you on this one. Okay, this is a pine, and this one you can see it's got a lot of lovely roots, but it's by no means pot bound. There's lots of space for the roots to grow. So that tree is not ready for repotting yet. Now let me show you or find some trees which are really pot bound. So I think the best example is, come with me to the back greenhouse. So every tree that you see here will all have to be repotted at some stage in their bonsai career. Now let's come in here. Now this is our indoor bonsai area, and many of these trees are the commercial trees, but even with the commercial trees, they grow at the rate of knots. So when I come to looking at each tree to decide whether it needs repotting or not, I take the tree out of the pot where I can and examine the roots. Now this one, you can see it's not pot bound. There's lots of room for the roots to grow. Okay, now this one, this is a good example. Look at the roots. See how tight it is packed around there. If you compare it with this is not tight at all. So this one on my right hand side doesn't need repotting, but this one is very tight. So this needs repotting. So you've got to look at each tree and decide on its merits. If it's not pot bound, then you don't touch it, don't do anything to it. So this is what you've got to do with all the trees. And spring is usually the best time. Many of you see me working demonstrations on these big trees. I do it most of the year because I put it in a big pot. I don't cut the roots much, I just put it in a big pot. But see this one again, I've taken it out of the pot. It's not pot bound. There's lots of room for it to grow. So that one doesn't need repotting. So this is how you have to decide. You've got to look at each tree and see whether it's pot bound or not, and then you proceed to repot it. So again, this one, so look at this one. See, the roots are going round and round there. It could do with repotting. It could do with repotting, so I'll probably do. Let's do some simple ones as well. We'll do some simple ones, and we will do some normal outdoor bonsai as well. By showing you how I go about repotting this tree. This is a pepper tree, by the way. It is one of the indoor varieties that we sell. And I said to you, this looks a bit pot bound, so all you need to do is tease the roots from the edges, the perimeter of the pot. You see how tight that root is? So just scratch away. Mind you, these are only small trees. Most people would probably have some of these, but those who are more experienced probably have bigger trees. And once you've done that, just cut away about ½ an inch or an inch all round. Many people think that you'll kill the tree by cutting it. I think the best analogy to give you is like cutting hair or cutting your nails. It doesn't hurt the tree. And there it fits in and enough room to put new soil. That's all you do. This one is not tied in because these commercial trees are not tied in. Now let me look at this one. This is the brush cherry. And again, you see the roots have gone round and round, so it's got no room to grow. It's got nowhere to grow. Just see, this is a very good example of a pot-bound tree. You see how the roots have just complete tangle. It must have gone round about 20, 30 times, round and round. And of course, this is in dire need of repotting. So what do we do? Because there's quite a lot of root there, I can safely cut all that off. I cut all that off. So that's the amount I cut from this little tree. And I haven't teased the roots yet. I can tease the roots a little bit. You usually have to judge how much root it has. If it has a lot of root, then cutting that much root doesn't really hurt the tree. You see, I can still cut a little more there. So that is what I have cut. And then I will proceed to put it back in the same pot. Or if you want the tree to grow bigger, you can put it in a slightly larger pot. Never put it in too big a pot. Just the next size up would do. So that is the treatment of the root. You notice that I cut the roots with what we call the root cutting scissors. I don't use my trimming shears. Let me explain to you. There's no reason why you can't, but there's a good reason why we don't use. These are what we call our shoot or twig shears. That means for trimming twigs. And because all tools have a cutting edge which is sharp, see they cut like that. If you were to cut the roots and cut soil or cut mud, it blunts the blade very easily and it spoils the blade. So you can use these, but why blunt them? So keep those tools separate for cutting the twigs and keep a separate pair for cutting the roots. These scissors with the big handle like this are normal Chinese scissors, but we call them our root shears, so we use this for cutting root. And the grip is good because it's got a big handle, so we use that. With this one for trimming shoots, you can be more delicate. So these are for cutting twigs. So this is the design we use for cutting the roots. So we've done this one. Now, before I take it to the potting bench, let me show you examples of two more trees. I like to show this because this is one of the metasequoias, metasequoia or dawn redwood. So this is dawn redwood. You may have seen I did a video earlier in the year where I restyled the trees. They are so vigorous. Look at this. This shoot, which is more than 45 centimeters or nearly 50 centimeters long, has grown in the latter part of the summer. And we don't want this. It's spoiling the shape. I shouldn't be doing this because I'm talking about repotting. I'm not talking about restyling. But while I got it, I can't bear to see a tree which looks like this. So this is what I normally do to bring it back to shape. You see what I've done? It changes the look of the tree. And that one should be wired that way. I don't have the wire, but that's what I've done to that. Now this one I will also do before I do the root pruning. All these long shoots I cut off. I'm showing you these vigorous shoots because this species is an extremely vigorous tree. All these long shoots, 40, 50 centimeter long, can grow in just a couple of months during the height of the growing season. So they have to be cut back. So because the tree is so vigorous, I will show you the condition of the roots. Look at the roots there. Look at those roots. And sometimes these trees are so vigorous, it can push the tree out of the pot. If you look at this tree, Look at that, it's 1 inch above the side of the pot. And why? Because of that mass of root in there. Look at the roots in there. So this particular variety is extremely vigorous, very vigorous. And if you don't repot this once a year, you will have a problem. It will burst the pot and can literally jump out of the pot. Look at that root, all grown in the last year. So when you get so much root, you can safely cut off all that. So you've got to judge the species, because some species are more vigorous than others. The weeping willow is another tree which is very similar. And the weeping willow, in fact, you can safely repot twice a year because it stands and grows in water. There's no danger of it suffering. So from that tree, look at the root I've got out from there. All that I've got out. And then now it can sit back and we can put some soil in there. So that's what you do with that one. So again, with this one, look at all that. Look at the thick root there. It is so thick. Mind you, this is the extreme. Not all trees are as vigorous as the dawn redwood. So the other trees which we do now, we usually start off with the deciduous trees like the Japanese maples. This is a very good time to repot Japanese maples before the buds start to break. Ideal time. So from this tree, look at the root I got off from there. So that is the amount I've discarded from there. And I can still tease it a little more to see how much more I can cut. There's another thick root. So we will now take all these trees over there and repot it. Okay. You notice that I was teasing the root with this. This is the stainless steel root rake. This is the favorite tool for repotting. Another tool, if you have very heavy trees or very big trees, these single hook root pruners, they're very good. They come in many designs. Some of them have got like a 2-prong hook, so that is also a very good thing. So these are all the tools you need. What else do we need? We've got this mesh, and mesh is used to put at the bottom of the pot. So this one, many of these commercial trees, they don't bother to put mesh underneath because they know that once the tree gets established, the roots will fill the pot, so there's no danger of the soil getting washed away. The reason why we put mesh is to stop the soil being washed out when you have to repot the tree. The other thing which the commercial nurseries, like when you buy these Chinese elms and all these other Chinese indoor trees, they don't bother to even tie it in because again, once the tree is established, it's not going to fall out of the pot. In fact, it's quite a job to get it out of the pot. So you don't have to worry about that. But we amateurs prefer to put a piece of wire to tie it in so that there's no danger of it falling out. So that is how we do that one. Let me prepare all the pots. So that's another pot here which has got these big holes, and we will put some mesh underneath to stop the soil getting washed away. I put one piece of mesh to cover the 2 holes. I'm lazy in effect because as long as it works, it doesn't matter how you do it. Some people go to the extent of putting these butterfly arrangements to stop the mesh falling out, but as long as it's covering the hole, whatever you do, as long as it works, that's fine. I'm not a great stickler for so-called rules. There's no such thing called rules. As long as it works, that's fine. Now let me talk something about the soil. There's a lot of misunderstanding about soils. I always say that people in different countries, and many of you live in different parts of the world, you'll have different climates, and you have different availabilities of soil. And in the temperate regions where we live in the UK and Northern Europe, and I would say North America, in the northern part, not in the south or the California and Arizona, we like to use a soil that is free draining. So we have our own secret formula for mixing our soil. We use a sort of general purpose bedding compost, which is peat and bark. I put pine bark in it. I then put akadama. So we have akadama, Japanese soil, and then we have all sorts of Japanese volcanic grits. And sometimes with the bigger trees, we put large grains of hyuga. As long as the material is free draining, that helps the soil. So this compost is a formula that we have tried over many years, and at last we've struck on what we call the magic formula, which has 5 different ingredients, and you can see how free draining it is. And this is called our general purpose compost. But if you have these indoor trees, you don't have to be too fussy. You can use just ordinary compost. This is ordinary potting compost which you can buy from garden centers, and because plants grow well in it, as I say, you can just use that instead of expensive bonsai compost. Bonsai compost is better, but if you are really stuck, there's no reason why you shouldn't use that compost. And all you do is fill the bottom with some soil, which you saw me do, and then fill the sides, and then really press the soil in. Don't worry, you won't compress the soil that much because soil will always spring back on you. So you can never pack it too tight. If you're using clay, it might get too tight. And then once you've done that, then with the 2 pieces of wire, you twist it around, stop the tree falling out, and there you are. You can lift the tree like that, and it won't come to any harm. So that is how we do these little trees. Let me reinforce it again by doing this one. So you've seen I put the mesh there, I put the wire in there, and then I put a little bit of compost at the bottom. As I say, you don't have to use this compost, just to prove what I'm doing. In fact, a lot of the Chinese trees come from China with just this type of peaty soil. They use coconut fiber quite a lot. Coconut fiber is a very good compost, and I then mix some of my own compost. But as I say, you don't have to be too fussy. Most of the peaty soils which are sold as compost, general purpose compost, will do the trick. But the bonsai compost is better, otherwise we wouldn't be selling it or wouldn't be making it. So there you are. So with the piece of wire, I will now twist it, tie it. So that's how you do these little indoor trees like that. Now when it comes to this dawn redwood, let me show you this. Another little trick I have is I use these upside down or upturned cascade pots because this is absolutely level. I can always see the level. So this is one particular device that I've used for the last 30 or 40 years, and it works for me, and I swear by it. So it always helps me to get a level, and it's the right height for repotting. So working in the right environment and with the right tools does help. Now let me just cut 2 little squares of mesh to tie the tree in. So these holes there, you see that pot with the holes? I'm going to cover those 2 holes with a little bit of mesh. You can see what I've done there. And then I will use a piece of wire. In this case, I'm using, I think this is 1 millimeter wire. If you have a bigger tree, then maybe use thicker wire. I sometimes use 3 millimeter wire for my very big trees. The trees which are about 1 meter tall, 1.2 meter tall. They're really heavy trees, so I use a heavy gauge wire to tie it in. Mind you, the pots are about 70 or 80 centimeter long and wide, so they are serious trees. So that has been repotted, so all I need to do is put a little bit of mesh, and now I will cover the bottom with some soil, just a tiny layer. You notice that I do not use a drainage layer. I'll talk about drainage layer. Many people, and in fact many books, always recommend a drainage layer. What do I mean by a drainage layer? I do use it for very big trees because the big trees compress the soil and it spoils the drainage. Some people do that, but if the pot is very small, if you fill the bottom half or 1 inch with this drainage layer, there is very little room for soil to be put in. And for that reason, I do not use a drainage layer. I'm not saying it's wrong to use a drainage layer, but I don't see the need to use a drainage layer The reason being that if your soil is free draining, which this is, why do I need a drainage layer? So this may seem heretical to some people, but it works for me, and I've done it for the last 40 years or more, and I swear by that. So as I say, provided your soil is the right consistency and drains well, you do not need to use the drainage layer. Maybe with pines and junipers or very expensive specimen trees, if you really don't want to risk it, then you can do that. So once I've done that, I've tied the tree in, I just proceed to put soil around the side, compress it with your fingers. You notice how deep my finger goes in. Goes in right up to there. 2-3 inches goes deep in. Just shows you got to really ram the soil in. I sometimes see people just patting it like that. Patting it at the top is not sufficient. You got to really go in. And there is also another little trick I can show you. There are many people who use chopsticks. You can use a chopstick if you wish. I can't find one, but I tend not to use it. But you can if you wish. But see, this is a good substitute. This is a spade. So like that, if you just push it in with a stick, any stick, it can help to fill all the crevices deep inside. So that is what you can do, pencil or a chopstick, you can do that. But I find that if you initially just ram it in with your thumb and finger, then that would be more than sufficient to ensure that the soil gets to all parts of the root system. So that is one done. Let me just reinforce the learning process by doing another one. Now this is another one, and you notice that I've cut off all that root. I shake some of the old root off, and talking of shaking root off, what I don't do, I noticed that in some of those Japanese manuals, they recommend washing all the soil off the roots. I find that a bit dangerous. If you do that, you can stress the tree too much. So I never wash all the soil off. I just take some of the soil off, and that is enough. If you wash all the soil off, as I say, it could endanger the life of the tree. So leave some soil with the root. Put some fresh soil at the bottom. This one I haven't prepared yet. Let me get around to doing it. Oh, I got mixed up. This wasn't done yet. Okay, let's do this by putting a couple of squares of mesh there. And if I put a piece of wire right through the pot, that will hold the mesh in position. I do not need to hold the mesh with all these little clips. You don't have to do that. Okay, so leave enough to tie the tree. So that is the pot prepared. So you begin by putting a little layer at the bottom, 1/2 inch or 1 inch, depending how deep the pot is, and position the tree correctly. Positioning the tree in the pot is quite an artistic job, and I won't mention too much of that at this stage because there are so many different situations where just a slight, positioning to the left or the right can make a big difference in the look of the tree. So this is your front there. I've got to wire some of these branches down. Now once it's in, I will tie the tree in first. These, mind you, are only small trees. When I get around to doing our big trees, the trees which are like 1 meter tall, 1.2 meter, 1.5 meter tall, those are the trees that require 3 to 4 men to lift. I will show you some of them. I have some trees which I will have to lift with a digger. It's almost like lifting with a crane, they're so heavy. I will video all those to show you, but not many people have those trees, so it may not be relevant to you, but I will do it just for the sake of doing it. But this is what we call general repotting at the start of the growing season. So there you are. I've done 4 trees for you to do. And as I say, in the UK, we start repotting in middle February, goes on right till March. And the deciduous trees we do first. Indoor trees you can do now because you can protect it in a protected environment. The outdoor trees, the evergreens, I usually start from middle of March and continue to the middle of April. So early spring or mid-spring are the best times to do repotting. So I hope this little video gives you confidence to do the repotting yourself.